All right, we're live. First time I've ever been bona fide late. There is some overcooked chicken that I just had to pull out of the oven. Okay, people, how is everybody doing? Let's make sure we are live. Mic check, 1, 2, mic check. I'm gonna go on to my phone. Nice, and the dog is barking. Okay, looks like we're live. All right. My goodness. Robert is in DC. I have been sort of following what's going on today in as much as can be followed. Let me just do one thing here. Put this on mute. It's 2021 is getting off to a wilder start than 2020 ended. For anybody who, let me just start from the beginning here. Quebec is also going through some stuff. We just got notice that we're going into lockdown now, but not just lockdown with a curfew starting Saturday. A curfew from 8 at night or 9 at night to 5 in the morning. So needless to say, this is try to stay upbeat at the psychological abuse of everything that's going on. And it's more or less easy. From what we were told, schools are going to stay open. So, we're free to go about our business during the day and work, I think. And schools will be open. But are my chats not refreshing here? So there's that. And it's going to go until February, 30 days starting Saturday. So until February something, as if it's not going to get renewed after then, because we've already been on a 2-week lockdown that started December 25th and was supposed to end January 11th. But that's not stopping. Okay. I'm just trying to get everything in order here. This was a short notice. 8 a.m. Yeah. So that's it. So that's what we're dealing with here. I'm not seeing the comments refresh on my end. Let me see if I can't. I can't see the chat. The comments are not refreshing, so I'll see what I can do for the chat. So that's it. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about what's going on in Washington, because it started off with objections to the certification of the Electoral College votes and got out of hand quickly. You can't make light of the situation. I will be honest that I saw the meme from Anchorman that escalated quickly, because from what I understand, it escalated quickly because I went out for a bit and came back and I saw a guy dressed like a wolf at the podium of Congress, and I didn't know how he got there. So standard things before we get into this, because I see Robert's there. Super chat's not a right of entry into the conversation. If we don't get to your super chat, don't give one. Let me rephrase it. If we don't get your super chat and you're going to be upset about it, don't give the super chat, because I don't like making people feel upset, but it's going to be tough to get to all of them. No legal advice, yada, yada, yada. Let's see what Robert is going to tell us from the ground in Washington, bringing him in. Robert, how you doing?
Good.
So your internet is going to be crappy. You look a little fuzzy, but it doesn't matter. I think now more important than a clear image is a clear understanding of what on earth happened today and what's going on. So starting from the beginning, today was the day they were going to raise objections to the certification before the Senate. How did it start? What happened? And you tweeted something about Pence turning down the offer to get involved. So let's start from the beginning.
So I've been here since yesterday. Met with some of Trump's team's lawyers that were meeting with members of Congress and trying to advocate different positions and give them sort of key talking points to review and that are relevant, pertinent information for the House and Senate objections today. Then the president spoke at the Ellipse, gave his speech, and was sort of partially it was a last speech of 2020, kind of also a speech to come in 2021. And so it was kind of a combination of both, and 2022 and 2023 and 2024, really. As Trump put it, this is not the end, this is just the beginning. And talked about primarying opponents and things of that nature. So really building all the things that we've been talking about for a couple of months that, he confirmed. that he's looking at building a lasting movement, challenging the establishment of both parties, including the Republican Party, primarying people who had not been loyal to the populist cause, and making it more institutional, documenting how the justices had not come to his defense, how his attorney general had not come to his defense, how Mitch McConnell had not come to his defense, and that he was almost anticipating that Vice President Pence would not come to his defense. So the latest request that Trump had made was that, and that various state legislative leaders had made in the key swing states, was that they be afforded an opportunity to meet and discuss the election prior to the certification of the electors, and that Pence sort of adjourn the proceedings as president of the proceedings to allow that to occur. As I've been talking about on here now for several months, and some people were critical, but I said, Pence was not the kind of person to take action. I believe he clearly does have constitutional authority to do so, but his course of conduct to date and his history of his behavior was that he would not take action. I think it was poor form, but he waited until right at the very end to tell people, by the way, no, I'm not going to take any action. And he said that, he'll allow objections to be heard, what he do, but that he was not going to take any action on his own accord. He was not going to adjourn the proceedings. He was not going to contest any electors. He was not going to decide whether electors count or not. He was going to leave that in the hands of the House and the Senate. And he announced that literally maybe a few minutes before he took the chambers as president of the Senate. They commenced the proceedings. They opened up the proceedings. No objection to Alaska and Alabama. And then when Arizona came up, there was an objection by Paul Gosar, joined by Ted Cruz, at which point they went back to the House and the Senate to hear the full objection and hear the full debate. While that debate, Gosar had made a presentation, Jim Jordan had made a presentation, Adam Schiff had made a presentation for the Democrats, Cruz and McConnell. And if anybody had any doubt that McConnell was betraying Trump, those doubts were resolved. McConnell made clear he opposed any form of objection, and he explained his reasoning for it. And then Cruz explained his reasoning, which was he was giving people a third door to pick from. They weren't being asked to reject the electors. They weren't being asked to certify the electors. They were simply being asked for an expedited 10-day emergency commission to investigate what happened in the election to increase the public confidence in the election. And then not long thereafter, it was announced that the House and the Senate would be adjourning because there had been a breach in the Capitol. And how it happened or what happened or who it happened, I know several people who were there. I was over in some government buildings during the day, and we were all watching it live from some high-ranking government personnel. And what we were witnessing was different reports from different places. Some places said people dressed up as Antifa members dressed up as MAGA supporters led the breach, when other members were simply going in there to go into the galley and watch the proceedings. Others say that there was the Capitol Police were not letting people in, and they got agitated that they thought they had a right to be let in, and that they just then broached the security. There's a third version that security simply stood down. What I can tell you is, since I've been here in D.C., it's been on hyper alert, super nervous. And so I find it strange that Capitol Police was the one group of people who were totally unprepared for this possibility.
And just to say, I'll tell everybody, because Robert and I were messaging before this, I'm saying it's early on. I've been reading the same, it's like a triple fakey false flag theories. It's early information. Not, take this all for what it's worth, because I don't want to be accused of spreading disinformation just because there's diverging theories of what happened. And there's going to be, even when, the information is out, there's always going to be the false flag theory. Like it was one side dressed up as the other, pretending to be the other, and that can go on forever. But bottom line, and we'll get there, but bottom line, they breached Capitol Hill, and they breached in, and it was
like the Occupy Wall Street movement. And, it goes all the way back. We have a long history of occupying government buildings. It goes back to the American Revolution. Where they physically shut down courthouses and occupied various buildings. So, Bernie Sanders campaigned on the fact that he occupied buildings at the University of Chicago as something that was heroic. So It looked from all put it this way, all I can confirm, other than that there was a young woman who was trying to get through to one of the chambers who was apparently shot, not known whether it was a rubber bullet or regular bullet. There have been reports that she has not made it. That has not been confirmed to me personally. That would be a tragedy, no doubt. Other than that, to my knowledge, I've seen no acts of actual violence. It's other than property, some breaking of some windows at the Capitol, and who did it is far from clear. Now, there are some people that I recognize from the past. There's a Twitter character known, who's no longer on Twitter, hasn't been for many years, called Baked Alaska, and he appeared to be live streaming from Pelosi's office. So, generally speaking, boys and girls, we should add to the rules, always in cash and never in writing. Don't live stream while you're committing a crime.
If I'm going by his name, Baked Alaska, I'm assuming this might be one of those things that is worth posting the crime so you have the bragging rights for the rest of your life. But
yes,
if the baked means what I think it means.
Exactly. And I honestly not. I mean, the media will act like, oh, this is the greatest, terrible, worst breach in human history. We have never seen anything. Did they skip D.C. over the whole summer when the city was half aflame? Well, the hypocrisy from the press. I don't support what took place. I don't support anybody breaking the rules and occupying buildings. But as protests go, and as illicit, unlawful protests go, it's nowhere near what we have witnessed all year from Antifa and BLM. And the media told us that was all fine. And so the media is misleading people, gaslighting people into that this was the most tragic, traumatic event in the history of the United States. I've heard press people today in D.C. saying this is the worst thing I've ever seen. And I was like, wow, you really haven't been around a while, or you managed not to see what happened this past year.
Well, no, and I follow Casey Neistat on Twitter, and he tweeted, how has no one been arrested yet for what happened on Capitol Hill? And I was going to tweet back, but it's not really a discussion I want to have. I was like, dude, they took over a police station in Seattle, and I don't believe anyone got arrested for that. I believe they let them do it, and the arrests came, after a week of
physical destruction. I mean, this is literally the people's house. This is the people's House of Representatives. So, if there's any building that I'm going to get least offended by being occupied by Americans, it's going to be the People's House of Representatives. That's not going to upset me. Violence would upset me, but people deciding to pretend they're Speaker of the House with the gavel. There's some of that the politicians need, some of that mockery. I wasn't bothered by that one bit. But you'll see the Attorney General suddenly step in. The National Guard that couldn't be called out during BLM suddenly is present very quickly. Just like, for example, there were people saying that if Pence tried to exercise any authority, the courts would immediately step in and shut it down. Will Chamberlain was saying this. And I was like, well, I thought there wasn't standing for these kind of controversies. So we're seeing how the system responds when you're on the wrong political side. But honestly, some degree of frustration should have been expected. You can't tell people the courts are closed, Congress is closed, the state legislatures are closed. We can't hear your evidence about whether election fraud occurred, and maybe we stole your vote too. What do you think people are going to do? You're telling people that they have no power left other than their physical actions. So there was going to be some people who are going to react this way. So that's why it wouldn't surprise me if some portion of Trumpists were the people that decided to take over the Capitol building. Plus, what have they been witnessing for the last year? Well, what has media messaging been about protests and riots? It's been, you get rewarded when you do that. Politically rewarded, personally rewarded.
It's an interesting point. I actually just want to bring up Tom Villers, who says, Barnes, I was there and the Capitol Police were treated pretty quickly. Thank you very much.
I had other people there, some media people that were filming a lot of stuff, and that they were saying the same thing. It does appear to have been spontaneous. At least put it this way, no one I knew anything about this in advance.
Well, it's spontaneous. This is sort of what I said in the video that I posted today, which I haven't released yet because it's still demonetized on YouTube. But when you have protesters, a group of people showing up anywhere, it just takes the V for Vendetta issue. It takes one person doing something to trigger a mass reaction from the crowd. And when you have passions as high as they are, and let me say this. I was going to tweet it, but it's not something that can be tweeted because it requires context. There is a difference between explaining and understanding and justifying. And Explaining and understanding why the violence occurred is far different than justifying it. And so nothing in here, full stop, is a justification. No. The question is, when you want to learn from an incident, you want to learn from an experience, you want to learn from history and the present, it does no good to say, I categorically denounce violence, so I'm not even going to try to understand what happened here. Right. Understanding and explaining, very different from justifying. There's no justifying violence barring, immediate imminent threat. Right. But to explain this and understand it, there's a context, there's a year's worth of building up, and you're mentioning it. Now, first things first, though, before getting into the breach of Capitol Hill, you meet with a team. I don't care who's in the team, really, because I don't want to ask questions I'm not allowed. Pence is not meeting with Trump to determine strategy, right? So they've got to know Pence's...
They were completely cut out. And so so Trump had no idea what Pence's plans were, or they weren't. And Pence's people were not giving any clue. They claimed they leaked something in the New York Times that said Pence had told Trump something, but as Trump himself confirmed, he had no idea. He didn't know until midway through until right before he went up to speak, that Pence was not going to do much. And Trump's view all the way through this whole process has been hope for the best, plan for the worst. He's not really surprised by what Pence did. A lot of people in Trump world are not surprised. It's the Trump voter that's surprised. The Trump voter had really come to believe what the conservative press had been spoon feeding him, which was that Pence was a loyal Trumpist. Those of us who have been behind the scenes have known he's never been a loyal Trumpist. I mean, he opposed him in Indiana. He supported Ted Cruz. He tried to replace him when the Access Hollywood issues arose in October. Did not come to his public defense at all. He was the one who orchestrated, in part, Flynn's ouster. He's the one who went down to Ecuador and made sure they seized Julian Assange and released him to the United States. So he's always been an establishment guy to the core, and he wanted just political cover to do so. And he was hoping that Trump would back off so that he would never have to expose his position. That's the reason why he didn't announce this earlier. That was my other complaint to people in Pence's camp when I was here. I was like, look, it was clear he's not going to do anything. He should announce it way before tomorrow. And well, now that's today. And
the rationale there is to prep voters for what's coming, so that it doesn't come as a slap in the face and a bucket of cold water.
Exactly. I mean, you couldn't have designed. Put it this way: I think that there were some people, whomever they may be, and whomever you want to ascribe them to be, who were looking forward, who were hoping that there was going to be a much more violent actions today. And they set the scene for that to happen. And wittingly or unwittingly, Pence's delay in his statement facilitated that. And the Capitol Police is massive. I mean, they're bigger than some small cities. Why they weren't prepared today, which everyone agrees they weren't prepared. The only question is whether it was why they weren't prepared. But if they had been prepared, none of this happens at all, because it appeared to have been only a few people who were involved in the actual breach. Everyone else just stayed outside. They stayed outside and, saying hallelujah and stuff like that. So the media has misrepresented it. None of the media cameras were there. So I have friends that are on conservative media and independent grassroots journalists and documentarians and whatnot who were there. And they were shocked. They're like, there wasn't a single CNN, Fox, any camera outside the Capitol, as if they seemed to, they plan to black this out, to do a blackout. They plan to do no coverage of this as much as they possibly could. And these people forced themselves onto the public display and were mostly, 95, I mean, this was something that truly was mostly peaceful, unlike buildings burning down in the background. There was, other than some glass breaking and whatever happened with the police shooting the one lady, the rest of it appeared to be, from all I've seen and all I've heard and all the people that were there at the scene who witnessed it, as far as I know. Now, I didn't know people that were on the inside. It was totally nonviolent. So, and when the National Guard showed up, everybody started to go home. So this wasn't that, the media will make a huge deal out of it. It's more symbolic than it is significant.
Well, I'll push back, because I know people are going to say, Barnes, this is one heck of a spin. People storming Capitol Hill, taking the podium, a woman's dead. By all accounts, and now this is what the reports are saying, it can't really get much more violent, save and except for X, Y, and Z. So you may, by comparison, it may be less destructive, less violent. We can take the numbers of the examples, but I don't. There's going to be people who are never going to believe that this was peaceful because of the way it went. And then it's just a question of dividing by zero to say which one was more violent over the summer, this or that.
Yeah. So well, the other question is, how do people feel about occupying buildings? Because at least the media and the left has historically celebrated occupying buildings, particularly public buildings. So, I found it interesting all of a sudden occupying buildings, if it's Congress and you're for Trump, is somehow morally horrendous. Maybe illegal for certain people to do so. Most of the people just occupied the grounds. They didn't occupy anything really. And so there's only a small percentage of people who actually occupied the inside of the building. And I just don't get that upset over people occupying the Speaker of the House's. It says something about power, that they don't get mad if somebody occupied some ordinary person's business or house, but they get enraged if it's the Speaker of the House, if someone takes a photo with her gavel or in her office. To me, that honestly, that just doesn't bother me nearly as much as the violence absolutely bothers me, though that appears to have been by the Capitol Police. And I mean, honestly, almost guaranteed to be an overreaction. So put it this way: what would the news headline have been if this was a leftist protest? Well, Capitol Police shoot unarmed girl as innocent unarmed protesters just try to bring social justice message to the world, right?
Yeah, but there is. We don't even need to imagine hard. There's no question it's going to be interpreted diametrically opposed in the exact same way. Politics ruins everything. Everything is. I'm just taking this chat down. You knew it was going to happen. There. In fact, I would venture to say it could never have been peaceful enough today for it not to be reported as a non-peaceful protest. But when you have people breaching Capitol Hill, and now you have the death context of which and the facts of which are going to emerge, you know the way they're going to spin it. It's the way spin it, explain away, condemn this, but tolerate that because one is voicing historical frustrations and the other is radicalized people who refuse to accept the outcome of an election. So you knew it.
Yeah, and I mostly put the blame on the Supreme Court. I mean, that this is when you tell people there's no remedy within the system, some percentage of the people are inevitably going to go outside of the system. So and that's why I put the blame there. But on a little bit of the blame goes to the QAnon world, because the reason why I was concerned about it was clearly it was escalating to something like this. Thankfully, this was nowhere near as violent as it could have been. I mean, this could have been much. I think there were some people in this town who wanted it to be much worse, to be able to condemn Trump and Trumpism than actually occurred.
Yeah, but they'll get what they if that's the agenda, they'll get what they need because there's a death of an innocent person. There's going to be pictures that they can use that will achieve that exact political purpose. But now let's step back a bit. So procedurally speaking, leading up to the events, and we'll get to where this goes now because I think it's up in the air as to what's going to happen. When does Pence make the speech that he says, there's little I can do, let's go to the objections?
He just he issued that in writing prior to him getting up because he wasn't going to say that apparently from the chambers themselves. So he just started having the tellers open the certificates. By the way, the certificates almost got stolen. They saved him at the last minute, which reminds me of the old great bank robbers of the 1920s who used to, as part of robbing banks, they would go in and burn the mortgages on farmers that the banks had because it was the only proof the banks had for the mortgages. And that's how the bank robbers made themselves heroes in the countryside. They almost got a control of the certificates, which legally would have required them to get another set of certificates from the governor sent in. But someone managed to salvage the certificates. So they have those physical certificates there. It does appear that only the certificates from the governors have been accepted by Pence. Because with Arizona, he didn't read out any other So those electors who sent their certificates to Pence rejected them, apparently, though he never explained why or how or that he'd done so. But that's clear by his what he did in Arizona. So my understanding is now the Trump critics are trying to use this as a pretext to force the House and Senate to no longer object to any other electors. They're saying, gee, see what happens if we even talk about objecting to electors, this is what's going to happen. When they don't realize the problem is the system's failure to address these concerns is why they're getting increased anger in people who feel a sense of futility and do things that are ill-advised. So, but that's where the pressures are. They may start back tonight in the House and the Senate They had not finished, even got close to finishing the debate about Arizona.
And now this is what I also want to, I brought up the chat earlier, and I actually want to say this categorically. I don't think breaching Capitol Hill is a good thing to do. I don't think it's a justifiable thing to do. And if anybody wants to argue intentions, if only because from a practical point of view, darn well it is going to be used as the pretext to avoid the debate that ought to have happened in the first place. You knew beforehand that was going to be the pretext. We can't even do it now, just rush to certification. And that is the counterproductiveness of violence. That and violence.
And counterproductiveness of the whole QAnon pitch, because it was trying to make people feel futile. So that if the magical things didn't happen, if the Insurrection Act wasn't invoked and the military didn't come out and Pence wasn't secretly on their side, then it leaves people feeling that this was the only election or you're doomed forever. It was meant to let people think that they have no other remedy, that democracy no longer works, the legal system no longer works, the Constitution's no longer alive. And I understand why people feel that way. They've seen governors make edicts for nearly a year, taking away every core right they have without even passing it through the legislature, and courts turn a blind eye to it. It's in town. Before this happened, I've been trying to argue to everyone, sooner or later, people are just going to lose it. And this is the risk you face if you don't have the legal system is there to ensure the confidence of the public. Once it loses it, it doesn't matter what theory you're trying to enforce. If people don't believe in you, you don't matter anymore. It's the fifth pillar of power under the other four pillars of power. So so I think that's the nature of it. I think Trump was disappointed today, to the Super Chats question. He didn't want anyone to approach the Congress, obviously. He just wanted a big crowd outside so that they could hear them and see them. Wasn't happy with that. He overruled the Pentagon at calling in the National Guard. The Pentagon initially said no because they had said no earlier. And Trump overruled them and had them come in.
So hold on. Actually, the report that I heard was that it was Pence and I don't know who I can't remember the names, who called in the National Guard, and Trump did not participate in the decision.
They're wrong about that. So the Trump did that's the media narrative. The media narrative is that, but I was in a very high-ranking government chambers when first they came back and said Pentagon's not going to get involved, and then came back and said Trump has said go ahead and send the National Guard, and overruled them. So I'm pretty sure that's what happened. There's going to be spin on it. Pence is trying to salvage his career because today he disappointed the entire Trump base, and again did it in a very poor fashion. If he was going to do this, he needed to prep them for it. But again, they really think, even though they lost the Senate yesterday, they really think that the big problem is Trump and that they just need to get past Trump. And they've been looking for any pretext. And that's why I thought Q was a psyop, because it was meant to discredit Trump. Not only and that what Lin Wood was doing was meant to do that. So the reason why they were moving Pence around apparently is because people were trying to spread messages about get to the vice president after something Lin Wood had said. So this is what happens when you're putting out that kind of nonsense. I believe you still resort to democratic constitutional remedies because I believe those remedies are still real and viable. Just because they won't work for this election doesn't mean they'll never work. And as a practical matter, any other solution that people think they have is not one that would practically ever work. So on that side of the aisle, but there were a lot. But most of the sentiment here by Trump supporters was positive. So there'll be a myth and a narrative that will develop from the media that all these crazies invaded town, that the town took over the Capitol, wanted to hurt everybody. They'll misattribute the death. The death is to Capitol Police overreacting and not preparing well. If that turns out to be the case, finally, from the evidence I've seen, not from the media was putting out false stories here initially that armed people with Trump had invaded. That is not what happened at all. I've seen no evidence of that. What you mostly have is some kids playing pranks who use the opportunity to take over the House, and then you have some people who are truly frustrated at what they see as a constitutional system that has failed them. And honestly, they're not wrong. The system has failed them in this election, and that's on the Supreme Court's fault. But some of it is on the QAnon side too, because when you build this is why I think they spread that it was a 4chan rumor from and loosely people sometimes will say Q didn't say that. That's true. I'm talking about the whole world, the whole QAnon environment. Someone on 4chan put up that board about how Roberts was scared of Antifa. Well, what's that intended to do? It sends a message of, hey, you know what? If you show you're willing to be physically violent, then maybe you'll get the system to respond. Now, part of that's on the press because and Democrats green lighting what Antifa and BLM did all summer long. But part of that is on QAnon spreading and the QAnon world and environment, spreading false stories, false narratives meant to create a sense of futility to drive people to do things they would not do in a normal state of mind. So it's a combination of, and we saw it all. I was just glad to see nothing truly extreme happen. I mean, any death is a tragedy, any injury is a tragedy, but this could have gone in a much different direction than it actually did, given the circumstances.
Okay, I don't recall at what time there was the breach. Before the breach, they started raising objections. Trying to think of
back to their own chambers and started speaking in the House and the Senate. Schiff, two people had spoken in the House, Congresswoman Lofgren, and I mean, the irony of what some of their arguments to the objections were interesting. So you had a Congresswoman from California who helped lead the impeachment effort, and then Schiff after that. If I'd been the Democrats, I might have put somebody not started off with those two necessarily in the House, saying how important it was to allow a transition occur and to honor the new in president. These are the two people who waged war against Trump as an illegitimate president for 4 years.
Nobody remembers that, Robert. Come on.
I know exactly, but all the Republicans do. So and then in the Senate, you had McConnell basically attack even the questioning of it. And Ted Cruz gave a very good speech. He was up next, and he'd already spoken before all this happened. And Cruz argued, "Look, we have a fair compromise here. I'm giving you a third compromise. This is not that radical a choice." Now there'll be massive pressure on House members to not object, and that somehow they're green lighting the bad things that took place. It's amazing watch the media narratives emerge that are radically different from when Antifa and BLM are violent. When Antifa and BLM are violent, you have to appease their cause. When any violence is blamed on Trump supporters, you have to condemn them and not associate with anything they care about. This contradiction is extraordinary. But as Eric Trump confirmed on social media yesterday, as the president confirmed today in his speech, as we've been talking about and as I've been predicting, anyone who fails to object to electors tonight and tomorrow in the House and the Senate will be primaried the next time they're up. So in my view, they have no political, so Rand Paul has this long rambling explanation as to why he can't do anything. Libertarians always have a funny reading on the Constitution sometimes, God bless them. They find rights for corporations that don't quite seem to be there, but they manage to find rights there, but just can't quite find rights for Trump. I mean, saying Congress has no role, I would have respected Pence more if he would have said just straightforwardly, I don't believe the country would accept me getting involved in this. And maybe I have the constitutional authority. Maybe I don't. There's a debate about it. But I don't believe there's enough public support for me to do so. And if he had done so a month ago, that would have been the honorable from these originalists. They always tell me they're originalists. Yeah, right. John Adams didn't have a problem interpreting whether he had that power. Thomas Jefferson didn't. So these people aren't originalists. Maybe we can get past that nonsense. And then McConnell to throw salt into the wound to Trump in his speech, saying, "Oh, Trump, it's your judges who've rejected you." No. It's your judges, Mitch, who rejected Trump. And now you're reminding him of that in that manner. So the Republican establishment wants to crush its populist opposition. It will use today's events as a pretext to try to do so in the court of public opinion. And it won't work with Trump supporters. So, it may work with people who already hated Trump supporters. So I don't see where it's going to achieve that much. But we're going to see how many House members and senators are so easily fazed by a day's narrative, and how many of them recognize that their political future is in Trump world, not adversarial to Trump world. My prediction is still multiple states are objected to. Multiple senators and House members will vote to object. Rand Paul may, be willing to blow up his future presidential aspirations, but I don't think everyone else is.
Okay, so all of the objections have been debated. They went back. What is the next step?
They were only part of the way through. So they were currently debating Arizona. So they still have about, I think, an hour and a half left in Arizona. There was talk of trying to shorten the debate time, talk of trying to consolidate the objections. It's not clear whether they're going to come back and do that. My understanding is any change in the rules have to be agreed to by everyone. And I don't think that's going to happen, at least in the House. So I think they're going to have to keep going forward. I would be surprised if Cruz or Hawley or any of them suddenly back down. Just because some people try to get into the House and the Senate. Media's going to make a big deal about it, but it being the most dramatic, shocking thing in American history. I mean, they've just witnessed D.C. go on, be lit up on fire 3 or 4 times in the last 6 months. So they're suddenly supposed to forfeit all of their politics in response to they don't know who simply took over the House and the Senate for a couple of hours. This is the least consequential occupation, or the least duration of almost any building occupation in modern protest history in the last 50 years. So, it will just show how weak they are. They would be making a mistake by, at this point, when they all know there's not a majority, then the only dumb vote is to vote to certify, because you know the certification is going to pass anyway. So why in the world risk being primaried by going along with it? But that'll show how dumb they are politically. I mean, they just lost the Senate because of how clueless they are.
Now, a few people have been asking. Jay Mills is just the one where I brought it up. Now, is there still any chance of getting the 10-day audit? And a couple of people asked about Cruz's suggestion. What are the chances? I mean, the chances of that happens now are slim to none, if not.
Yeah, very low. I mean, they were very low coming in. And talking to the Trump team last night, it was just, the numbers weren't there. So they already knew the numbers weren't there, and this just gives them gives his opponents an easier pretext to vote no. Now they'll vote no. Mitt Romney will feel he has to be morally courageous, just like his loser father, and step into the broach to condemn this. So just like his dad, he's going to exit the political world a rejected loser. But and some more of them may. So we're going to find out. But some still don't get it. So if Trump really had wanted them to take over buildings, he could have made that call and it would have happened. There would have been millions of people here, not just hundreds of thousands. There would have been, and they would have occupied this town. So the idea that they still don't quite get that this was, just an organic, spontaneous reaction, apparently, of just a few people could take over the Capitol for a few hours. What happens when 5 million people lose confidence in your system? I remember debating this with an attorney general from Maine about their tax system. He was like, man, you don't understand, Barnes, that once there's 20% of the people who don't believe in our tax system, our tax system will collapse. And I was like, well, you better not take this case to trial, because if I win acquittal, every Maine lobsterman is going to go along with it. It led to a good resolution. But there is this lack of the DC establishment is completely out of touch, and they don't understand the anger that's out there. This was just a small glimpse of how raw and deep the disagreement, the disturbance, and anger is, and resentment is in the public at what they've seen. I mean, it's not, and the election is just the culmination of it. It's really 20, 30 years of betrayal in a lot of people's views, and in the last year. Your business and your dream has been killed and crushed for a lot of these people that are here in town. They're here in town because they have no business left. Over 70% of small businesses in some jurisdictions are going to be gone and never come back. Did they think there would be no consequence for that? We've never done anything like that in our history in America. And they're clueless up here. They're just used to going and getting their little French dinners with their lobbyist pals and then watching CNN, and they think that's the world.
It's like it's a literal let them eat cake 2020. I don't get depressed. I may get depressed. This is actually depressing, not from a political perspective. I'm sitting here in Canada where we're literally shut down, locked down indefinitely, like animals, and whatever the justification is, whether you think the justification is legit or not, it doesn't change the fact. You can cage an animal for a very good reason, or you can cage an animal out of abuse. The effect on the animal is going to be the same. And at the end of the day, we are just very intelligent animals with dreams and aspirations. And they all, looking at what's going on in the United States, it's not a United States specific problem. It's exacerbated by United States specific issues, the election and faith in democracy. But this is human nature culminating in pent-up frustrations. And I tweeted out, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. There are people now who feel they have nothing left to lose. And again, it's not a justification. It is an understanding where does this go?
Right.
Now I'm speaking from a Canadian perspective because we don't have elections to worry about just yet. We just have our lives and livelihoods and actual way of life to worry about. And then I brought this up. Twitter locked.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I say Twitter locked Trump's account for 12 hours if he doesn't remove a post indefinitely. That is the modern version of I love Big Brother. Say you love Big Brother, and we'll let you.
The irony is the post they're blocking is him telling people to go home.
Oh, that's not irony, Robert. I mean, I think that's deliberate by design. Although, in fairness, I didn't see the post. If it's coupled with something that can be deemed whatever, and you give them the pretext, you know they're going to abuse it. Some people are going to say they're going to abuse it regardless. But if it's coupled with something, they'll abuse it for political gain.
Twitter's unilateral interpretation apparently was that they thought it might motivate people somehow. It's like that is the most persuasive pitch to have everyone, but it didn't matter anyway. If you knew this crowd, you knew they were going to go home as soon as the National Guard showed up. And once Baked Alaska was in there, he's not a violent guy. He's just he's half prankster, half political activist. I think he was BuzzFeed. He used to work for back in the day. Now he got associated with some people that I thought were ill-advised to be associated with, but that's what it is. I hope this did put a rest to all the Q nonsense, because look at what happens when just a few people occupy the Capitol briefly, and the president says go home. They're willing to block all of his Twitter, and there's people saying he should resign. So the idea that he could bring out the military and that somehow would have magically solved things, when it would have gone just the opposite way. And hopefully that's a little more clear to people out there.
It was a super chat. I raised it earlier. I remember it now. Was 25th Amendment remove Trump from office. Now, does this lend any additional weight to that?
That's all nonsense. So, I mean, they want to escalate things and they want to, make a big deal out of it. They were prepared to make a big deal out of it, which was interesting to me. I mean, it does play into my suspicions about some of people's motivations. But at the end of the day, they have Capitol Police shot someone, probably, well, at least questionably, and that's the only physical harm that I've seen reported. That's it. And then otherwise, there's some glass they have to replace. So, and apparently, some people borrowed some of Pelosi's mail. Apparently, they borrowed the mail, but they asked the guy about it. He said, "No, I left 25 cents, no problem." So. But this is not Antifa burning down anyone burning down buildings, destroying property, physically assaulting people. That's the stuff I get real upset about. This was not something to get, in my view, that upset about. It was not a good idea, but as dumb ideas go, there are worse ones. So but that's why I don't think any of this will not backlash on Trump. This just gives Congress more of an excuse to deny him remedy. It's not going to change his perspective on any of it. Being sitting in that room with a lot of high-end Trumpers, that they were not going to be affected by the mainstream narrative on this. Their commitment is nowhere different than it was coming in.
And I'll go a little step further. I know people don't like it because they consider me a polite, passive Canadian. I think it is a bad idea. I mean, I think it's all fundamentally a bad idea to breach the fences.
Yes.
Because first of all, it gives the state the right to come in with even more force. It's Sun Tzu's Art of War. Like, only exercise force if you know you're going to win it, or if in losing it, it's going to procure some beneficial advantage. But just to do it for the sake of it, knowing it's going to be weaponized against you, weaponized against your cause, weaponized against your interests, and you have no chance of gaining anything from it. It's bad all around. And it's
that's why I was up there. I mean, I knew something was going to happen. So I was meeting with some people instead, and I was concerned of something worse. Apparently, somebody did put pipe bombs at the Republican National Committee.
Apparently, at the RN, from what I've read, early stage information at the RNC and the DNC, and they were both diffused. I read on both, but again, I'm reluctant to talk about this because it's so early that we might find that it was not
going on, and it would be potentially false flag kind of operations. You'd have to really figure out who did what. So we'll see. I mean, it was eventful. Never seen anything like it. You see people occupied the American Capitol, stormed or for a little while. So we haven't had, I've always been struck that more people haven't done that more often, to be honest with you. But it's because usually it's tough to storm the Capitol. But we live in interesting times. Never a good idea unless you've got something strategic that I don't know about. But it was fascinating to witness.
It was, it's nuts. It's nuts. Like, we're living through history, and I'm just curious. I'm not going to live long enough, but I want to know how this is going to be looked at. Maybe I will in 100 years. I'll be 141. I can do it. No, but like, how is this going to be looked back on? Because it's nuts by any objective standard.
Institutional narrative, definitely in the near short term, but probably for a decent term, will be this is a horrific, tragic, traumatic day for democracy itself, and I think there were so many visually iconic moments, and just the title. It was really the peasants storming the elite castle. I mean, that was the kind of language that was used. That was the kind of people that were involved. Ordinary, everyday people wrapped up in patriotic clothing and flags and symbols, and these people waving the Trump flag out while occupying the Capitol steps and singing Hallelujah. Fascinating visuals that will last long in the public mind. And I think in the Trump-based mind, a very significant symbolic moment of the attempts to take over the system that didn't work. And how it ultimately plays out 20, 40, 50 years ago will partially depend on whether it becomes a common phenomenon or not. I think the left's recognition about how easy it is to take over the Capitol is going to be tempting to them. So I don't think we've seen the end of occupied capitals. It's just not likely to come from the right next. It's more likely to come from the left. They'll probably try to raid the Supreme Court like they kind of tried to do at the Kavanaugh hearing, or after he got put in. I think they'll probably up the ante on police presence here in the city in terms of federal institutional buildings. Because they took a lot of that down to let BLM and Antifa do whatever they wanted all summer. Now you'll probably see them amp it up again to discourage it and deter it now that Biden is in charge. Because chaos was seen as a thing they could blame on Trump. Doesn't serve their interest to allow chaos to occur once Biden is in. So it'll be used as a cover story for some Republicans to hide under their desks tomorrow. But the ultimate end game doesn't really change. I mean, there's a big demand for election reform. This will probably have a lasting effect on some politicians' minds of what can happen if they don't provide little d democratic reform. I mean, that's where the reason why the left uses the tactics they do is they've studied history and they see that, in fact, depending on how things unfold in full, but if you don't have too much violence, the net effect of these kind of demonstrations is it leads politicians to be more responsive over time, not initially. It depends, but it's the reason why the left uses the tactics they do. It's because there's a lot of evidence that historically works. And so I think that will be a bit of an effect, but it won't happen immediately. It will happen more long term. It will be a big clue how many Republicans object, because the expectation was 80 House members and 13 senators. If that number declines, it tells you that the media's initial spin on this was able to scare them and back them off. If that number stays the same or rises, it says that they have a more clear-eyed view of the political map and that this didn't affect their judgment. It won't help Cruz or Hawley to suddenly hide under the desk because there were some people who took over their chambers. And so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I think anybody who thought that there was a secret plan for Trump to get the presidency can now realize there never was. Trump was on his own mostly, using his 74 million plus voters as his leverage, just to try to get a brief hearing in Congress. But it's useful to figure out who's on the right side and on the wrong side, and at least we went partially through the constitutional process. And I personally like that, because now we've set a precedent for future use that you can't object in Congress when there are questions about a presidential election.
Okay, I'm just reading some comments here. I was going to ask another question. Okay, so apparently someone just said that they're reconvening for 8 o'clock tonight.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah, so they'll probably debate some more tonight. They'll see how many more objections. They had imposed on themselves an internal deadline of Thursday. I don't know why, to certify the electors. The Electoral Count Act only requires that they do it within 5 days. The Constitution only requires they choose by the time of Inauguration Day. And even then, arguably, you can choose after Inauguration Day. So I don't know why they impose that kind of limit on themselves, but it's the way this town works. They're hoping to push Trump out and discredit Trump. They got a partial victory today by how people acted by taking over Congress. That will at least temporarily discredit Trump in some eyes. I don't think it will have a long-term much effect because he worked to shut it down as quickly as he could. And for the most part, people behaved well. Only a small minority behaved poorly. Most stayed outside. Like that's, if you notice, most of the chambers were still empty. That's because even though the Trumpists could have raided, they didn't. They stayed outside. So it was only a very small group of people that ever were willing to partake in illegality and trespass. And I'm sure we'll suddenly discover the criminal justice system works suddenly. The Antifa people that blew up stuff, and protesters who blew up stuff at the inauguration of Trump, who all got to take a walk for the most part, will now see anybody who sat in Pelosi's chair get the max. So we'll see the hypocrisy of our criminal justice system one more time.
Well, we'll see. Apparently, another chat said Newsmax is going to investigate the ties for all of the people who are there. And I suspect they all have pretty decent social media footprints that are going to be hard to scrub or deny. So they'll find out any affiliation and whether or not, to which side they belong. So we'll see about that. But apparently someone else emailed me and said Google is not showing search results for Newsmax, which I haven't been able to verify myself. Okay, but so explain it to someone who's 5 years old, because that's me. They're gonna resume the debates tonight.
Right. So what happens is they're supposed to do within 2 hours. Under the Electoral Count Act, their procedures are that each chamber debates for 2 hours any state that's objected to. So presumably they will finish up the objections to Arizona, for which I think there was an hour to an hour and a half left. Then they will vote. Each chamber will vote. And that'll be the first sign of whether there's any kind of momentum of any kind, one direction or another. And they will then go back and join and go into joint chambers at the House of Representatives and declare what their vote is. And then Pence will either say, based on the vote, those electors are accepted for Joe Biden or not. There's some people who think that Pence will suddenly, do something. I don't believe he will at this juncture. He'll accept whatever. And right now, it looks like the numbers aren't there for the House or the Senate to both vote to object to the electors. Then the question becomes, how many other states do they object to? What the senators said they would object to is at least 6 states' electors. And then the question is, do they do 2 hours per state like the electoral count provides for? Presumably that's what they want to have happen, because they're anticipating that could happen, because if there's 6 states more to object to, then they would wrap up sometime before midnight tomorrow. And apparently they've self-imposed a deadline of that for themselves, even though the Electoral Count Act doesn't require that timeline. So there's some people who believe there will be fewer objections to fewer states. We'll see. So we'll see. I mean, it would look bad if just because a few people raid the chambers, they suddenly decide they won't do what they said they would do yesterday. But you never know with Republicans. So they're an unreliable ally of the populist cause and always have been institutionally. So but that's where it'll go. Presumably they'll debate each state. They'll get to make each presentation on both sides. They let each side gets to decide how many, there's an hour basically for each side to debate. And each side's leadership gets to decide how much time they give to each particular member. So I presume that, I think the idea was to allow everybody to speak in over 12 hours, or 6 hours per side of presentation. Everybody would get a chance to have their say. I think the best speech so far that's been made, there's been some good substantive presentation on the evidence by Gosar and Jordan, but I do recommend people go back and look at Ted Cruz's speech, because I thought that was the most practical and pragmatic, where he said, look, I understand we don't want to throw out votes, and I understand we don't want to certify an election there's questions about. What's so hard about a 10-day commission? I think that may have had enough momentum that by the stunt happening today, they derailed any momentum for him.
So, I mean, some might say that the stunt today will show that if they don't get the 10-day audit, people might go even crazier. Storm.
Over time, we can't have a court pretend that they can't get involved in these things, and we can't have executive branch officials stick their head in the ground. I mean, this is not a pattern to repeat. Now, my hope is, in talking to people here in town, there's a lot of coordination. I mentioned Cleta Mitchell, fantastic lawyer I worked with, because she was. Oh, by the way, that call was illegally leaked by the Secretary of State. I got the whole backstory. It was a settlement conference call. So that by law in Georgia is confidential. That's why they were all on the phone. And they'd agreed to keep it confidential. And the Secretary of State leaked it. And not only did he leak it to try to embarrass Trump, he leaked all of it. He could have cut off the beginning part that had people's names on it. He knew that by those people's names being disclosed, they would lose their jobs. And that's already happened. Cleta Mitchell, Foley Lardner, the firm I clerked for when I was a young law student, Midwestern-based conservative firm. It tells you how bad the legal system has become in America, that and the legal academy has become, and that law firms have become, that they push out, that Cleta Mitchell realizes she can't work there anymore just because of her representing, being involved in helping Trump. Now, I think that's good long-term for Cleta. I think she's glad to be free of the handcuffs she's been under for the last 4 years. And I think and I've talked to other people, I was like, we should start to form politically independent firms, or at least relationships, associations, to help create election law reform, to replace the entire Republican establishment legal world for judicial recommendations. I got another story on that too. There's some amazing stories here in town. Turns out that Barr had known evidence. They caught somebody on tape or live padding in, doing ballot harvesting of over 7,000 ballots in Michigan. And the key people in the U.S. Attorney's Office covered it up. And several of the key people in the U.S. Attorney's Office, one of them was up to become a federal judge. Needless to say, that went bye-bye because he didn't realize there's still enough Trump allies left. And but that was part of the reason for Barr being pushed out early. It was that Trump couldn't understand how and why Barr was taking no action when, in fact, he had direct evidence of illicit ballot harvesting in Michigan, of thousands, of just one guy stuffing thousands and thousands of votes in. And remember, folks, ballot harvesting is illegal in most parts of the country. You cannot be caught with more than 3 ballots in your possession. In some places, in most places, just your ballot. That's what Project Veritas documented in Minnesota. This was on a much bigger scale, and people who were up to become Trump-appointed judges were part of the cover-up to suppress that information, and Barr was part of covering it up. So that's why you heard Trump talk about Barr today. He's like, "He used to be my friend, and then somewhere along the way, not so much my friend." And he understands what's happened. These are people that have caved and capitulated to the establishment or always were part of it. The Federalist Society world. He called out the judges and justices today. So he's recognizing, but that's why today was a clarion call. He was like, don't worry about whatever happens. This is the beginning. This is just the beginning, not the end. What we've been talking about, what I've been saying for about a couple of months. And it was always great to see him say it. And he's not going to be defeated by any of this. People are going to say, oh, he's down, he's angry, this is the media's imagination. I'm sure he's disappointed by what happened today, and he's disappointed that Pence did nothing for him, and he's disappointed that he has so few allies in the House and the Senate, but it's not a surprise to him anymore. And he's been preparing for this day for months. And, like he told me on the phone, this is where you learn who your friends are and who maybe aren't your friends. And he has a long memory. So I think it's going to be a fun coming up 4 years. So I think people shouldn't let today rattle them one way or the other. We're going to see who has backbone and who doesn't. We're going to see who's with it and who isn't. We got at least some part of the constitutional precedent set by a House member and senator meaningfully objecting to an election, and that's a good thing for the future. And so and we set the foundation for real change to occur, and people have the proper motivation for it. If you want to keep people committed to our constitutional democratic process, let them have a meaningful hearing and do meaningful election reform. There's a lot of people here who are gung-ho on that idea, that believe that there's a lot of legislators in multiple states. Talked to Trump people last night. Georgia's wide open all the Republican legislators in all the contested states want someone to come propose a bunch of election reform, and me, Richard Barris, and some others are going to help them out in that accord. But I think there'll be some very good constitutional democratic changes in the coming year that will give people more faith and confidence in our elections going forward.
I brought up the chat earlier. Can't see it now, but there's Supreme Court's not getting involved. That's just not happening in the near term. It might happen in the longer term to set some sort of precedent for future elections.
Correct. I think my position was that there would be some pressure by some of them to do something over the next year to say this kind of election should not reoccur. But that's more of an outside probability than a probable probability. So there's still a chance of that, because what happened was really problematic. And today was the result of it. If the Supreme Court would have taken it up, and even if they would have rejected Trump substantively, said this doesn't violate the Constitution, then that would have been the end of it, and Trump would have still had his concerns in his election contest in Georgia and elsewhere. But for most people, it would have been, okay, I disagree with the conclusion, but I'm willing to accept it and move on. Their unwillingness to get involved, and to do so on such disingenuous grounds, which frankly all the Pence apologists exposed. It's like these same Pence apologists, many of them were really proud at the fact that there was no standing for the Texas case. Well, if there's anything that's called a political question, it's whatever Pence interprets his constitutional power as. If there's no standing for Texas, there's definitely no standing to challenge Pence had he exercised such power. But their readiness, and they're right that they suddenly would discover standing, shows what a politically abused doctrine, pretextual doctrine that it is. But I think there's a lot, from talking to people up here, there's a lot of people up here that are gung-ho on making meaningful reform and meaningful change and have a better roadmap for doing so. That's what knowing what your allies are is helpful for. That's what understanding why the Federalist Society should not have a monopoly on judicial appointments anymore. All of this has been very eye-opening, because there were a lot of Trumpists that were still part institutionalists who believe, like Pence, bye-bye future career. Mike Pence will never be a presidential nominee of any party. That's gone. He ended that today. Frankly, some of us wanted that to happen, because Pence is not a loyal Trumpist, and we just got the opportunity for that to be shown to the entire world. But better now than say he somehow snuck in and became the president, and then you see it for 4 years. So I think for those of us that are on the Trumpist side, there's a lot positive to take away from what has otherwise been a disappointing day.
All right. I mean, and I think you've mentioned it, but the next steps, they're going to debate some more. They're going to go through objections per state, whether or not they raise all of the objections for the expected states. Which states? Obviously, they were going to object to Wisconsin, Michigan,
Arizona, then Georgia, then Michigan, then Pennsylvania, then Wisconsin. And the only question was whether Nevada and New Mexico would be part of that. The senators agreed to include Nevada, and a bunch of House members said they would object to Nevada. There's a chance that New Mexico is included because Trump electors were sent in from New Mexico, and because there's an election contest about how New Mexico handled their election. So so I think given those components, there should be another 10 hours of debate at least. And I think they'd almost scheduled it anticipating that. So we'll see if that happens. I think there's massive pressure for everyone to grandstand about how horrified they are at the temporary takeover of their quarters, and to try to shut down debate and dialogue. That would be a mistake at multiple levels. It'd be a mistake for all the Trumpists. Frankly, it'd be a mistake for the Biden world. Let the debate happen. If I was on Biden's team, I'd say let the debate happen, let it lose, and then use that as your argument. Don't come up with a pretext to continue to deny people a hearing. That sends the wrong message, and he'll be known as his fraudulent C the second.
And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the chats in the comments in the chat is that people are saying, like, there's no, I don't know how to phrase this. Some people are going to say the courts didn't hear it because they were frivolous to begin with. Others are going to say there can be no legitimacy. The courts refused to hear this. Politicians refused to stand up for it. Nobody did an investigation. Barr jumped ship and threw everyone under. He jumped the bus and threw everyone under it. And what now? People are saying, Barnes, and they're angry. angry and venting.
But there's going to be constructive, productive places to put that anger in ways that make lasting, meaningful change over the next year. And so I'm going to be a part of that. And I think we'll have the best election laws that we've ever had to put through over the next year or two. I think that we'll have the best populist movement that we've had since Andrew Jackson and since the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King over the next 4 years. So, and I can tell you that's what a lot of high-ranking, smart political strategists that are on the Trump side believe in this town, including people who occupy key positions of power right now. So I understand it's natural to feel futile, but that's a sucker's bet.
Okay, so we're going to know between tonight and tomorrow, although the expectation is it's not going to go anywhere. If there's objections to a few states, it might not even be determinate as far as the Electoral College goes. The Electoral College votes goes. When is the decision on certification of the Electoral College votes going to happen? Best guess.
So it will be whenever whenever Pence finishes the list. And that's presumed right now that will likely occur by sometime before midnight Thursday. And so the belief is that Pence will read Biden in as the elected president of the United States at the end of Thursday.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions on this? What I'm going to see if anyone brings up any questions.
I talked to people tonight where we are looking at creating that. I was joking around about calling it the Anti-Federalist Society because the Anti-Federalists were the true populists who were trying to insist on a real Bill of Rights before the Constitution passed. But that might get over some people's heads. So I'm coming up with a name for it. But there are a bunch of lawyers that are looking to do it precisely that. Ironically, and the other thing is, I was pitching to people in town, I was like, start your own law firms outside the big corporate structure. And I would be pitching business to anybody that's a client of any big corporate firm. I was like, look at these big corporate firms. They're so scared of political pressure, they'll abandon the president of the United States. What do you think they'll do to you the moment your cause becomes politically unpalatable or unpopular? You can't be represented by a big corporate law firm if you're any kind of business other than a Fortune 500 company. You can't trust them. They'll screw you. They'll shaft you. So you need to go find independent firms and help direct revenue and resources to populist lawyers who are aligned for populist causes in their spare time. So I'm trying to do everything I can to have a little fun with the system and have the system work a little bit better. I think it's going to move much more in that direction. I understand people who are skeptical after what they've witnessed, but the fact that the system had to go to such desperate lengths to do what they did means that it's weak, not that it's strong.
Well, a lot of people think you're delusional in thinking that any meaningful election reform is going to come out of this. That the Democrat, I'm just reading the comments, and it's not my opinion.
And that's a very understandable perspective. And I would say that if I was in their shoes 20 years ago, I probably would have agreed. I stayed out of politics mostly personally for 20 years for that very reason. But, again, the biggest trick the system pulls is convincing people to have no power. The moment you believe that, then the system really does have all the power. The moment you recognize you have the power, look at how scared they were at a few people occupying their chairs. That tells you how weak this system is. They were shaking at a few people just holding the gavel up. So they do not have the power. They've never had the power. It's the mirage of power. So us as ordinary everyday people always have the ultimate power. We just have to exercise it in a way that honors our constitutional ancestors, not that slaps them in the face. And so and there's plenty of ways to do that. And I guarantee you there will be at least a state that passes great election law reform within 2 years. So every one of these legislatures need to get reelected, and they're in serious trouble if they don't pass election law reform, if they don't, in order to get reelected. So, I heard that from high-ranking people that are well-connected in many of these key states with key legislators. So this is coming, and we just have to use this window of opportunity over the next year to push it and pressure it. I think there'll be hearings in Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and Wisconsin within the year on legislative reform, and people like myself, Richard Barris, and others will be making presentations either directly or behind the scenes as to what the election law reform should look like. But it's coming. There's no doubt about that.
Well, you got some. I'm just pulling up MindReader. PHA says we had laws this election; they weren't obeyed. Well,
that's part of the problem, but our laws were nowhere near strict enough. There was enough room where they could interpret them. and there needs to be no room for interpretation. That's what's made clear. And when I was talking to everybody here in town this last several days, they all agreed that was the problem. There was too much discretionary authority. That needs to be stripped from them entirely. One of the things we need election contests to go back to the elected state legislatures, not go to courts at all, period. Courts have proven they're useless when it comes to this. So they need to be, Pennsylvania already has that for everything but the presidential election. Let's use it as a model. Let's include the presidential election within it, and let's expand it to multiple states. And I've never met a state legislature that really objects to having more power. So so we'll use the fact that the courts took a dive on this election to say we can't trust them anymore. And we need you, the state legislatures, to decide election contests, require them to be in session for the purposes of handling such contests, which would actually resolve a major problem in the presidential election that came up this cycle. And I think some of those reforms are going to happen. And clear rights to watch and observe, so that you can't have a Pennsylvania court come up with some pretext of bogus excuse. So they have no discretion. They would have to just completely lie to try to pretend otherwise. So the window was left open because they didn't make clear the laws, because it wasn't known that it was needed for that clarity to exist until this election exposed it.
All right, and Cat Zap says, what if Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Arizona state legislatures decertify their electors tomorrow?
That would be great, because then they would have a bunch more people object. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, again, that's why I thought the QAnon disinformation campaign wanted some people to do some crazy stuff today to try to discredit Trump's electoral challenge. And it's the reason. Otherwise, I could care less about Q. People thought that I cared about Q. I don't, to be honest with you. I hadn't said anything much about it for years. It's only because I could see today coming. It's why I wasn't there at the Capitol myself. I had good friends that were there, but I wasn't going to be there because I knew there was a risk of something going crazy, and something did. And I partially blame the system for failing to give people a meaningful remedy, at least a hearing. Just, what's so hard about giving people a hearing these days? But the second part of it is, I used to say due process was your right to be heard before they beat you up. Now they took even away the right to, the hearing before they beat you up. They just beat you up. They just went straight to the beating, Chicago cop style justice. They skipped the warning and just there's the whack over the head. But I think out of all this will comes very positive reforms, because people recognize the weaknesses in our system with much better clarity. And we have many democratic constitutional remedies that absolutely can work. And if people exercise and put their power in that productive, constructive way, that's how they can change things. Any other method has never been proven to be successful in recent history, whereas this method has been proven. I mean, if you were Martin Luther King in 1955 and you thought within 10 years you'd have a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act and all Black Americans would be able to vote across the country when that had never occurred, people would have thought you were nuts. Yet that's exactly what happened.
All right, we got the civil rights lawyer says you guys need at least one more American lawyer on some of these talks. Hint, hint. I don't know who the civil rights lawyer is. Forgive me if I should, but I figure I have to bring that chat up for some good. What are the chances now with respect to Assange pardon, Assange Snowden? So actually, let's. It's a good segue. It'll be another issue. Assange, he was found. The request for extradition was denied, which is good. I feel like the guy from The Simpsons. Sorry.
Yeah, her grounds were the weakest grounds, but it was absolutely fantastic. Now, of course, today she didn't give him bail.
Well, that's the thing. The request for extradition denied. They're appealing it, and bail is denied, notwithstanding the fact that the request for extradition has been denied. So he's still in the same maximum security prison, whatever. Yes. Still not free, because they're convinced he's a flight risk if they let him go. Which the rationale of that makes absolutely a flight risk and a potential suicide risk. The rationale for that makes no sense to me, because why would he flee the only place that has denied the extradition request? Doesn't make sense to me, but maybe I'm missing something. So a victory and a loss, he's still in jail.
The reason he was denied extradition is because his mental health is so bad. So leaving him in this condition that keeps killing his mental health makes no sense either. What I've told people here in town is that if I was a suspicious man, and I can be, this would look like an effort to delay Trump from ever thinking about pardoning him until after Trump is gone. And when Biden comes in, all of a sudden the high court steps in and reinstates the request for extradition. So I'm skeptical now. People have assured me, and I know the Assange team. I told them I would help them with anything that they needed on the extradition defense, and they threw everything at it. And there was a good presentation on the significance of this on the Gaggle with Peter Lavelle. You've been on there. I've been on there. Great show because they're people that understand America, but from an independent third-party international perspective. So Peter Lavelle, George Samueli, the Irish girl whose name I'm afraid to say because I think I might get it wrong. Because
her name is Kira.
I always think of it as Sierra because of how it's spelled. Kira. But they're fantastic. They do a really good breakdown of it. Recommend people see it. About 2020, and they do a great breakdown every day of all kinds of interesting news and information and intel. And what they confirmed the same thing that I said, which was that everybody who had witnessed this thought there was no chance. And this goes back to people saying no chance. They said there was no chance, and I thought there was no chance that Assange would get relief. And instead, the judge came in, and it sounded horrific if you were listening to it. She was like, denied, all the reasons Assange raised, denied. And he had so many very good reasons. And then she gets to the end and says, but given his mental health condition, and this is something I've been arguing with extradition lawyers for a decade now, I said, indict America's criminal justice system in extradition proceedings. I was part of doing so in the Larry Williams case that led to a good negotiated outcome where he was able to come back and have bail while pending trial. And then ultimately they gave him a sweetheart deal during trial because they realized their case was crap. And that's Michelle Williams, who was Heath Ledger's girlfriend for a period of time, great actress in her own right, her father. But that's what she did. She recognized that our criminal justice system in the United States, our methods of punishment, our methods of imprisonment are so horrific for certain populations that it is unconscionable to extradite a person to the United States who could face that. Supermax is an atrocious abomination of an institution. There's other ways to secure people without basically torturing them for 30 years. And that's what the Supermax does. People, and I would love to see it, finally, a court issued a consequence to our American justice system having Epstein die in custody. Because that was one of the key cases she cited. She's like, here's a prison system that's supposed to make suicide impossible, and yet a person that was the highest purported risk for it, Jeffrey Epstein, managed to, quote, kill himself there. So if we're to take that at face value, eternal truth, Epstein didn't kill himself, but take it at face value, that means we cannot trust the criminal justice system in the United States to protect someone's safety and security either from themselves or from others. And that's been true. I mean, the medical system is an abomination in the federal prison system, even worse in the state prison system, which is just barbarian. And I understand people don't care about criminals, but a lot of these people that are in there for politically motivated reasons. And it's not all, wife beaters that are in prison. Some of them are just people that got caught up in something beyond themselves. Some people didn't even do anything wrong and have been wrongfully prosecuted and convicted, so on and so forth. The Shawshank Redemption is not just pure fiction, folks. So that's our first book and movie reference of the night.
Well, my movie reference to you in our DMs was that watching TV today actually felt like that last scene out of Fight Club where we're saying it was very odd. You met me at a very interesting time of my life where you're watching a man dressed like a wolf standing on the podium of Capitol Hill. It was surreal. But
I mean, honestly, I will confess, I found a lot of that funny. I know I'm not supposed to finding it as funny, but having an ordinary blue collar guy put his feet up on Pelosi's desk. I'm sorry, I wasn't offended by that.
Well, whatever jail time that particular person gets, that's going to be a defining moment for that person's life. And if he runs for office in 30 years, it's going to be
old blue collar guy. He didn't try to hack the computers. He didn't try to destroy stuff like Antifa. He just wanted to say, here's what America is supposed to look like and what it doesn't look like. An ordinary Joe being able to have the highest power in the land, not somebody who managed to get very, very rich while she was in public office. So so some of that, my populist instincts are still for, and they still didn't trash the town anywhere near as Andrew Jackson's fans did in 1828. They came in to celebrate, and they still trashed the town. So so we'll see about all that. But yeah, it's been a fascinating time to be alive, no doubt about that.
Okay, so now, first of all, sorry, getting back to Assange, because I had one question. Let me just bring this down. I don't understand the rationale for keeping him in jail now. So what is the rationale for keeping him in jail pending the appeal, and how long is that going to take?
I mean, unfortunately, the rationale, like a client I once had, is that he skipped bail last time. I mean, it's because Assange skipped bail last time, of course. Now, the question is, where was he going to skip bail to this time? There was no embassy in the entire United Kingdom. I mean, what did they think he was going to go into the Russian embassy and try to live there for a while? So the reality is he wasn't going to go anywhere unless he got bad news on the appeal. And most people that that know the English law system have said they don't see a high court overturning this appeal because of the grounds on which it was given. If she had given any of the other grounds, maybe. But these grounds are hard to overturn because they're, well, as we both know, they're very fact driven.
Yeah.
And it's hard. She saw him in court. I mean, anyone that's been close to him or that I know has told me his mental health has been very precarious for the last year. I mean, this guy's been basically stuck in a closet for 7 years before he was stuck into one of the worst prisons in the world for the last year. So it has been torture by almost any fair, independent definition of it, in my view. But in Supermax and the rest would have just been the risk of it would have just added to that. But I agree from the perspective of if she says his mental health says you can't extradite him, then his mental health means you had to give him some form of bail, transfer him to a mental health facility, something else, but it couldn't be under the same horrendous conditions that mirror Supermax. And she's just pretending that the English prison system is nowhere near as bad as the American prison system, when reality is large parts of it are as bad. Well, maybe not quite as bad, but it can be still equally deleterious to its health. So but the problem was, of course, he had jumped bail before. Now, I've got bail for clients that have done that before, but it's brutal, brutal, brutal work. I mean, I got bail for a guy they found with 2 false passports and $300,000 in cash.
That's almost as bad as an OJ with a face mask and a plane ticket and cash in the dash.
Exactly. I had many good explanations for this, and but I found ways around it that got the outcome that I wanted. And I got a prosecutor to go crazy on the record. Then he didn't realize that the judge was listening to him because those mics stay on in federal courtrooms, and he ended up actually resigning. Like a couple of weeks later, he was going to be the U.S. attorney. I mean, poor guy. I kind of feel bad for him.
All right, now people are saying Senate is back on right now. Okay, a few people saying it, so interesting. I guess, and we will cut it. I should end it at an hour and a half because this was impromptu, and I have left parenting duties to somebody. So what do we? Oh, sorry, hold on. Everyone, thumbs up, like it if you are so inclined, because we had a lot of people, 13,000 people still. It's phenomenal. So everyone, go hit that thumbs up button just so we can see the number go, and it's satisfying. Assange, we know the next steps. When are you in Washington until?
I don't know. It's it says playing it by ear. So they finally did schedule a trial for the Trump's Georgia election contest. They scheduled it for Friday after all the votes take place. Can you imagine? And the judge that it's assigned to, I'm trying to help out where I can, but I won't go into detail, but let's just say there could have been better judicial trials in this particular one. I'll give just one story of this judge. A lawyer had a case in front of her, and it was all about this dog that got taken from him in this wrongful way, and this dog that was harmed. And the first thing this judge said was, well, by the way, I hate dogs. So, I mean, imagine being in front of that kind of jurist. So not probably a lot of hope for something particularly good to come out of it, but they'll document the record very, very well. I met with some of the IT people that were part of that case today. Met with some of the lawyers yesterday who were part of it. So it's well presented. There's just, again, the courts have effectively closed, but it'll be good to document it and demonstrate it. And so part of that, but I'm probably back to Vegas, but it was, I met with the people who I could meet with and had the influence that I could and set things up like I wanted to. So I think most of that is ready to rock and roll. And we'll be announcing it in the coming weeks. So I was much more encouraged after coming here than I was beforehand. So that's my response to it. And I think other people over time, when they see how constructive and positive they can be in changing things for matters that they care about, will see the same thing.
Okay, that might be a good time to end it because I don't know what else we're going to cover until we see where this goes tonight. And you probably need to get back to to get back to watching it. Okay, everybody, thank you all for tuning in. This was amazing. Last minute, Robert messaged me and said, "Let's do this," and he is on the ground and he's seeing it firsthand. So it's quite a thing to see. Let's just bring this. Thank you so much. Hope Robert goes to locals after big day. We need counsel. Everyone, perfect plug. Robert, you want to end it with a plug to locals and some words of optimism?
Sure. So 2 things. One is, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. That's the site. So I will be over there on and off over the next couple of hours, answering questions and commenting as we can. And all I'll say is that after being here myself, that I have more confidence and belief and hope than I've had in quite some time. I believe we can make real change based on what's taken place, that can make institutional reform, that can make the world better for the causes and for the people that we all collectively care about. So I hope the president does still pardon Assange and Snowden before January 20th. And we have not heard the end of Donald Trump. And as Trump himself said today, this is not the end. This is just the beginning.
All right. And with that said, everybody, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the support, the continued support. I don't know. Stay optimistic. Life is stress, but stay strong and stay the course. We'll see you on Sunday. We're going to go live on Sunday. Next Tuesday is the debate with Dershowitz. I'm going to send out the link for that tomorrow. So that is it. Everybody have a good evening, good rest of the week, and stay